LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the December 9th edition of LiberalViewer Monday Media Mixup. Thanks for joining me and Chong the cat here. This is actually the 1-year anniversary of the adoption of the kittens Cheech and Chong. I also had dental surgery a few days ago, and my mouth is a little sore, but I think it's not as bad as I was worried it would be, and so I'm going to do the regular show for you all today about my main topic. It's Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad overthrown. That was surprising news over the weekend. It was the main topic of most of the Sunday morning news analysis shows, and I've taken the 11 best, most newsworthy clips from the big 5 corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what to be a really educational, informative, fair use, media criticism, and political commentary show for you all today. There were a couple exceptions to the Bashar al-Assad government getting overthrown by the rebels in Syria as being the main topic. On NBC News' Meet the Press, they had an exclusive interview with Donald Trump, and I'll show a clip of that too. Fox News Sunday, they mostly pre-recorded, although they covered it a little bit. But that will be what I'll be talking to you about mostly today. And I do have a strange piece of political comedy that goes with Bashar al-Assad. It's actually a video I made about 11 years ago. In some ways, I think it's my weirdest video. A lot of people didn't get it, but I just rewatched it yesterday, and I actually still kind of like it. And it's not only political comedy, but it's a video. It's under 3 minutes. I'm going to show you the whole video from 11 years ago. And it's not only political comedy, but it's actually a video about political comedy and what is acceptable political comedy when you're making jokes about things that are not very funny. And I'll talk about that with you a little more after we watch my old video from 2013 together over here.
LiberalViewer presents.
So, a brutal dictator most likely responsible for gassing his own people doesn't seem like a big source of comedy, but there's a long history of American media ridiculing America's military enemies and potential enemies, so it shouldn't be so surprising that The Late Show with David Letterman did the segment titled Bashar al-Assad, President of Laughs, that you can see in this clip.
Time now for Bashar al-Assad, the President of Laughs. Bashar al-Assad, President of Laughs. Take it away.
Do you consider chemical warfare equivalent to nuclear warfare?
I don't know. We haven't tried either.
Now, the rim shot and laugh track definitely add to the comedic effect of the Bashar al-Assad President of Laughs gag, but I actually found a couple more parts of Charlie Rose's interview of Assad that seemed inappropriately comedic, especially this one part where Assad was describing Syrian rebels experimenting with chemical weapons that seemed to end with the classic "that's what she said" joke here.
One of those weapons exploded in one of the tunnels and killed 12. That's what she said.
Now, for those who don't know, "That's What She Said" probably first appeared as a joke in the media in the 1992 movie Wayne's World in this classic scene.
Yeah, 'cause I'm getting tired of holding this.
Yeah, that's what she said.
And of course, "That's What She Said" attained legendary meme status after being popularized by Steve Carell's character Michael Scott on The Office, for example.
That's what she said.
And for those who understandably find this joking about a brutal dictator and the gassing of hundreds of people, including children, to be inappropriate, remember that there is a long history in America of ridiculing enemies in wartime, even including Adolf Hitler, as exemplified in the rarely seen Bugs Bunny cartoon from 1945 that included this clip.
Heil Hitler. So, macht einen Blitzkrieg an, aber Sauerkrauten mit seiner Haben der Hunderten nennen, mit Stammeln in der Backe, Opfassen, Gluten, Fluten, Bluten, Tuten, mit roten Toten.
So, joking about Assad is nothing compared to the Charlie Chaplin or Bugs Bunny material on Hitler while Hitler was committing the worst kind of atrocities, though, speaking of Bugs Bunny, for some reason, the character Bashar al-Assad really reminded me of during that interview was Elmer Fudd, and that was especially true when I caught Assad saying,
kill the rabbit.
So what do you think? Is it appropriate to make jokes about brutal dictators engaged in terrible acts? And regarding Assad's Charlie Rose interview, available in full at a link in the video description below, did you find anything Bashar al-Assad said persuasive, or, like me, did you find his answers mostly just dishonest and strange?
YouTube, you decide.
So yeah, that was a video I made 11 years ago. I still kind of like it. I don't know. It is definitely strange, though, and I don't know. But it has some good clips in there, and it is about political comedy, and it is about Bashar al-Assad, who, that was back when there was, it was revealed that he most likely gassed his own people, and that's one of the things I'll be covering with the Newsmaker clips, is the threat of those chemical weapons, and whether that means that the United States has some need to be involved in what's going on in that area, or whether, as Donald Trump put up on Truth Social, that it's not our fight and we should stay out of it. And I'll show some Republicans responding to that. Also, some Republicans trying to claim that Trump gets credit for the fall of Bashar al-Assad. Those will all come up in the Newsmaker clips. But first, I want to show you the news summaries from longest to shortest. The longest one is CBS News Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan, and then their reporter on the Syrian-Turkish border give, I think, one of the best news summaries about what happened in Syria, and I'll talk about that with you a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Good morning and welcome to Face the Nation. For the first time in 54 years, the Al-Assad family is no longer ruling Syria. Rebels who'd been fighting government forces for 13 years swept through Syria in 2 weeks, capturing Damascus, taking the Syrian people and the world by surprise. Dictator Bashar al-Assad appears to have fled the country, and we are reminded this morning of the horrors from his reign of terror. His brutal suppression of anti-regime protests in 2011 sparked the world's largest refugee crisis. Since then, the mass atrocities became too numerous to detail, the death toll impossible to tally, including due to the regime's use of chemical weapons against civilians. Assad dared to test whether America and the world would stop him, something then President Obama chose not to do militarily, even after he crossed that so-called red line. Here's our Bob Schieffer's report on Assad's chemical weapon attack from 2013.
The death toll in what appears to be a poison gas attack in the Syrian civil war continues to rise. By some estimates, as many as 1,800 people may have been killed. Rebels blame the Syrian government, which continues to deny any responsibility. Whoever is responsible, perhaps nothing can better help us understand the horror of Syria than this video of a mother telling her small child goodbye, almost as if she is hugging her goodnight and tucking her into bed.
President-elect Donald Trump met Saturday with French President Emmanuel Macron, as well as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, who is lobbying for more aid from the U.S. and NATO allies in his country's war with Russia. In a post on his Truth Social website early this morning, Mr. Trump blamed Assad's defeat on the entanglements of his allies, saying Russia lost all interest in Syria because of Ukraine, and along with Iran, Russia is in a, quote, weakened state right now. Trump called for an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine, saying that Zelensky and Ukraine wanted to make a deal to stop the madness. We begin our coverage today with our Imtiaz Tyab reporting from the Turkish-Syrian border.
Scenes like this would have been unthinkable just 1 week ago. Syrian rebels in the heart of Damascus celebrating the fall of the regime, with the whereabouts of President Bashar al-Assad unknown. As people wept for joy in the streets, shouting freedom. Some rebels appeared on state TV to announce Assad's removal. His stunning defeat was at the hands of an alliance of armed groups who launched a lightning-fast offensive seemingly out of nowhere, and who faced little resistance from the Syrian army. The rebel forces say they have now, quote, fully liberated a number of major cities and have also emptied prisons filled with those who dared to stand up against Assad's rule during the country's nearly 14-year civil war. A war that, up until now, had seemed frozen, even forgotten. But as the statues and monuments to the Assad dynasty continue to be pulled to the ground, the family's blood-soaked half-century of authoritarian rule passed from father to son is now over. 10 years ago, at the height of the civil war, which was born out of the Arab Spring uprisings, Assad was then just barely clinging to power. But Russia and Iran, along with Lebanon's powerful Iranian-backed Hezbollah militia, came to his rescue and tipped the war firmly in his favor through a punishing campaign of well-documented war crimes, including indiscriminate airstrikes and chemical weapons attacks, a brutality against his own people that's hard to fathom. But Russia is now preoccupied with its war in Ukraine. Hezbollah's leadership has been decapitated after a year of bitter fighting with Israel, and Iran, along with its other proxies, have also been degraded by Israeli strikes. Assad's 24-year rule looks unlikely to be rescued or resurrected, ushering a new but deeply uncertain era for Syria. And a key leader of Syria's armed opposition, Abu Muhammad al-Jilani, who belongs to a group known as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which used to be aligned with al-Qaeda, has forbid anyone to go near the buildings housing Syria's state institutions, signaling the rebels want to support a peaceful transition of power. But the power vacuum left by Bashar al-Assad is enormous, Margaret. And the fear is these groups could soon turn on each other and begin a new, perhaps even darker chapter in this already ugly civil war.
That's Imtiaz Tyab reporting from the Turkish-Syrian border. And we're joined now by the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Ohio Congressman Mike Turner.
And I will have a clip of Mike Turner talking about how America should react to the news from Syria, and also talking about the chemical weapons and if that's a threat, and also talking about Turkey, and Turkey's involvement in this overthrowing of the Assad regime. That wasn't really reported there from the CBS reporter, but that's one of the more important stories that I don't think has really been covered a lot. I think it comes up in one of the other news summaries, I think the ABC one coming up, or the discussion there, where this is actually a victory for Turkey that has allied itself with the HTS group that is the main leader of this rebel coalition, and they're Sunni, and Turkey supports the Sunni majority in Syria. I think about 70-something% of Syria is Sunni Muslim. Bashar al-Assad is an Alawite, which is like a Shia sect, and I think together Alawites and Shia make up something like, 20%? Or I don't know exactly. But so this is a victory for Turkey, but not so much for the United States. More supports the Kurds as part of the rebel coalition, and that's more of the NATO forces, or are more, and you'll see actually Representative Mike Turner talks about that as a failure for the Biden administration, and the clip I'll eventually show you. But I want to get on to the next news summary. The next longest one is the Fox News Sunday one. Shannon Bream did this thing where a lot of the show was pre-recorded, just like last week, from the Reagan Defense Forum in Simi Valley, California, and so they don't ask any of the newsmakers about the news of the week or the news of the weekend, because it looks like it was recorded at maybe 1 or 2 days early before what happened in Syria happened. They'll show a clip of Jake Sullivan talking about Syria as weak before it fell on Saturday at that forum. And then they have Trey Yingst reporting on what happened in Syria from Israel. but not from the Israeli-Syrian border, but some city in Israel you can see in the background of his shot. Then they go to Lucas Tomlinson at the White House reporting on reaction at home, but mostly like Trump reaction. And I pretty much pre-criticized the Fox News Sunday news summary, which they're almost treating Donald Trump like he's already president and trying to downplay the Biden administration involvement in what happened to the extent they had any. And you'll see that also in the panel discussion I show as the first newsmaker clip from Fox News Sunday. But here's the Fox News Sunday news summary. I'll talk about it a little more after we watch together over here.
We begin with the Fox News alert. Crowds celebrating in the streets of Damascus after the fall of Bashar al-Assad's government following a lightning-fast advance by rebel forces. There are reports he has fled the capital. It is unclear where he is at this hour. Assad's family has ruled with an iron fist for the country for 50 years. We've got team coverage with Lucas Tomlinson at the White House and Fox News chief foreign correspondent Trey Yingst in Israel. And that is where we begin. Hello, Trey.
Shannon, good morning. After 54 years, the Assad regime in Syria has fallen. Overnight, rebels entered the capital of Damascus unopposed. Thousands of Syrians gathered in the city, celebrating the collapse of government control. As reports indicate, former President Bashar al-Assad fled by plane. Impassioned civilians stormed the Iranian embassy compound, a country that spent billions of dollars propping up the regime, as they spoke about the future of Syria.
It's a feeling of joy after 13 years of pressure and tragedy since we were born. The regime pressured and hurt us, but now we are free, without any fear or oppression, which will be lifted from our hearts. We will return stronger and united, and will be the best country, God willing.
The rebel takeover came after a rapid 11-day offensive that started by taking the northern city of Aleppo before opposition forces worked their way south. Abu Mohammed al-Jalani, the leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, insists there will be an orderly transfer of power. His organization is a U.S.-designated terror group, and the 42-year-old himself is the founder of Jabhat al-Nusra, an al-Qaeda affiliate. Amid concern of further instability and unpredictable activity in Syria, Israeli forces are ramping up their posture along the border, sending soldiers into the buffer zone with Syria. This demilitarized area of the Golan Heights will likely be held by the Israelis, with rebel forces now controlling the other side of the border. This afternoon, reports do indicate Israeli forces were bombing Syria in an effort to target weapons belonging to the Assad regime. They don't want some of those weapons to fall into the hands of rebel forces. Shannon.
All right, Trey Yingst, thank you very much. And now for reaction here at home, we go to Lucas Tomlinson at the White House. Hello, Lucas.
Good morning, Shannon. This is being described in some quarters as a Berlin Wall moment for Syria now that the Assad regime has fallen. Here at the White House, a spokesman for the National Security Council says, quote, President Biden and his team are closely monitoring the extraordinary events in Syria and staying in constant touch with regional partners. President Biden has not yet weighed in. His national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, offered his assessment from the Reagan National Defense Forum hours before Syrian President Bashar al-Assad's government collapsed.
Assad's backers, Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah, have all been weakened and distracted. And so he has not had the support from those three actors that he expected to be able to count on and has been left basically naked.
Early this morning, President-elect Donald Trump, who now receives intelligence briefings, said, quote, Assad is gone. He has fled his country. His protector, Russia, led by Vladimir Putin, was not interested in protecting him any longer. There was no reason for Russia to be there in the first place. They lost all interest in Syria because of Ukraine, where close to 600,000 Russian soldiers lay wounded or dead. And Trump went on to call for an immediate ceasefire in Ukraine. In a previous post, Trump discussed the unfolding situation in Syria. The United States should have nothing to do with it. This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved. President-elect Trump, back on the world stage, attended the reopening of the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris yesterday.
It certainly seems like the world is going a little crazy right now, and we'll be talking about that.
Trump's national security team that he's assembled includes Marco Rubio, John Ratcliffe, Mike Waltz, Tulsi Gabbard, and Pete Hegseth as defense secretary. Trump says he fully supports Hegseth after some Republican senators, including Joni Ernst, raised concerns.
Looks like Peter's doing well now. I mean, people were a little bit concerned.
Do you think he can make it?
No. I think he will, yeah.
A Republican senator on the Armed Services Committee tells Fox Hegseth has the votes right now to be confirmed as defense secretary. Shannon?
All right, Lucas Tomlinson, we appreciate that on a noisy morning at the White House. Thank you. Time now for our Sunday group, USA Today, Washington.
Yeah, so they do their panel discussion right after the news summary because all of their newsmaker interviews were pre-recorded and don't mention Syria. And did Lucas Tomlinson mention Pete Hegseth's drinking problem there, or any of like what the controversy was about him? I don't know. I don't think that I think that they often on Fox News report the controversy without telling you what the controversy is. I've seen the live comments that I'm getting a couple questions about whether there were chemical weapons used by Syria, and I said that was the most likely thing. There's been a lot of reports of that. You've seen it in the CBS News Face the Nation news summary I showed you already. You'll see it reported from multiple journalistic organizations. I put a link here in the live chat to the Human Rights Report on it. If you want to read the Wikipedia entry that'll give you links to like all the different, including UN organizations, various governmental organizations, various news organizations that have documented Syria's use of chemical weapons. I mean, I know that that's something that Tulsi Gabbard questioned after she met with Bashar al-Assad, and Bashar al-Assad actually denied the whole thing. He said the Syrian rebels were the ones who used the chemical weapons. That was the part of that original political comedy clip I showed that in the Charlie Rose interview. I mentioned how the whole kill the rabbit line came from his claim that the Syrian rebels were testing chemical weapons, and it wasn't him, it was them. But I'm more likely to believe all those numerous sources I cited than Bashar al-Assad's denial, but you can come to your own opinion. Also, something about whether the U.S. was involved. Well, I don't know if the person making these comments is actually listening to what I'm saying, but I was just talking about how this was more a victory for the Turkish-backed forces, not the U.S. NATO-backed Kurd forces, but like the HGS-led rebels, and that's why I'm talking about how this wasn't the result of the U.S.-led or the U.S.-backed forces weren't really the victorious forces in this overthrowing the Assad regime. But if you want to find alternate information or believe something else, I guess that is, or I'm not sure where you're getting those ideas from, but I just thought I would clarify that before I move on to the next news summary from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Martha Raddatz, who is very much plugged into the military-industrial complex, reports on the same story, and then James Longman, I believe, also mentions the use of chemical weapons by Bashar al-Assad over in the third news summary we'll watch together over here.
Good morning. As we come on the air this morning, we are tracking one of the most extraordinary events in Middle East history. In Syria, overnight, rebel forces sweeping through the capital city of Damascus, putting an end to the brutal 24-year dictatorship of Bashar al-Assad. The rebels seen celebrating the stunning turn of events as people poured into the streets in jubilation at Assad's fall. This will have a profound impact on the region and beyond, with almost all the major global powers involved in Syria's ongoing war, including the U.S. Syria's allies, Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah, have been weakened and distracted by their own conflicts, leaving Assad with little protection. In a moment, I'll speak to the former commander of U.S. forces in the region, retired General Frank McKenzie, on what this means, including for the 900 U.S.-based forces in Syria. But we begin this morning with ABC's chief international correspondent, James Longman, with the very latest. Good morning, James.
Yeah, good morning, Martha. Quite simply, Assad's regime was seen to be completely hollow without the support of Iran, Hezbollah and Russia. Bashar al-Assad inherited power from his father nearly 25 years ago. He's been clinging on to power through years of civil war. But now a new rebel movement has managed to topple him in less than 2 weeks.
This morning, history in Syria, with Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad overthrown with breakneck speed by rebel fighters. In his palace and office, in his private home, discovering the wealth that the Assad regime accumulated over decades in power. The streets in the capital filled with people celebrating. Few saw this coming. Rebels in the state TV studio announcing their triumph, saying the city of Damascus has been liberated. The tyrant Bashar al-Assad has been toppled. Al Jazeera's Zina Khodor in Damascus this morning following the rebel takeover.
This is the Umayyad Square. This is the center of the Syrian capital. And this is the Syrian state TV and radio, which is now under the control of the opposition. People are there's a lot of celebratory gunfire.
Rebel Military Operations Command now claim Assad has fled Damascus. Assad's military appeared to completely dissolve, with rebels seizing Damascus with little opposition. The group managing to overrun key cities in less than 2 weeks. For 24 years, Assad ruled this nation, propped up by allies Iran, Russia and Hezbollah, who helped him manage 14 years of civil war and the brutal crushing of the revolution against his regime. But Assad failed to fully re-establish control in the north, with Turkey quietly supporting the various Islamist rebel groups jockeying for power. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, emerged from that chaos, taking advantage of wars in Ukraine, Gaza and Lebanon, which weakened and distracted Assad's allies. On Saturday, the group stormed the city of Homs, where the Syrian rebellion began in 2011, also releasing prisoners who had opposed Assad's regime and languished in Syria's infamous jails for years. Chants of "Long live Syria," "Down with Al-Assad," and a group setting fire to a poster of the now former Syrian president. And earlier this week, rebels seized the city of Hama, tearing down this large statue of Assad's father, Hafez, hundreds cheering in support. President Biden and the United States have acted with caution, with no plans to step in. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan assessed the stunning rebellion on Saturday.
Assad's backers, Iran, Russia, and Hezbollah, have all been weakened and distracted, and so he has not had the support from those three actors that he expected to be able to count on and has been left basically naked.
And James joins us now. And James, you have covered the Syrian conflict since its very beginning. How did this happen so fast?
Well, quite simply, no one saw this coming. The rebel movement has been boiling in Syria for some years, but without the support of his allies, Bashar al-Assad just could not keep them at bay. I've been speaking to Syrians that I've met over the last 13 years. They are overjoyed at what they're seeing. They're desperate to go home. Millions of Syrians have been displaced by this war. Big question now, can whatever transition happens, happen peacefully? Martha?
Our thanks to James Longman. Former CENTCOM commander, retired General Frank McKenzie.
And I will show a clip from General Frank McKenzie talking about what U.S. interests are in keeping involved in what's happening in Syria, despite what Donald Trump said about it not being our fight. And that is a possible upcoming split in the Republican Party, although I don't know if retired General Frank McKenzie's a Republican, but I think there are a lot of hawkish Republicans who might disagree with what Donald Trump is saying, and I have a couple clips where I'm going to talk about that. That was not the report from James Longman that talked about Bashar al-Assad's use of chemical weapons. It's actually, you saw it in the CBS News Face the Nation report, and they even showed Bob Schieffer back in 2013, around the time I made my political comedy video and the Charlie Rose interview where he denied it. Bob Schieffer reported on the chemical weapons used by Bashar al-Assad in 2013, and that was in the CBS report. And then the journalist, the longtime Syria expert who Jake Tapper talks to at the beginning of CNN State of the Union, we talked to yesterday, Nick Paton Walsh, he also talks about the use of chemical weapons and other brutal tactics used on civilians by Bashar al-Assad in his long war against his own people, and I will talk about that a little more after we watch that clip together over here.
Hello, I'm Dick Tapper in Washington, where the state of our union is following the breaking news out of the Middle East, the collapse overnight of the Bashar al-Assad government in Syria, after rebel forces seemed to come out of nowhere, taking just days to overwhelm and oust the brutally repressive government that has been in power for several decades. Across the Middle East, Syrians rejoiced as some hope to soon return to their home country, as Russia's foreign ministry confirmed that Bashar al-Assad had, quote, decided to leave the presidential post and left the country, giving instructions to transfer power peacefully, unquote. Syrian state media read a statement from the rebels this morning.
We announce to you from the Syrian news channel the victory of the great Syrian revolution after 13 years of patience and sacrifice. We won the bet and toppled the criminal Assad regime.
But what is very unclear this morning is what comes next, amid fears about what the rebels might do with their power, as well as concerns about the extremist terrorist elements within their ranks. Let's go to a reporter who has traveled to Syria more than a dozen times in the past decade, covering the civil war from its start in 2012 to the ISIS rout of 2017. And CNN's Paton Walsh joins me now with more. Nick, this seemed to take world leaders by surprise.
Look, I think it took, frankly, everyone by surprise. But if you look at the larger dynamics that behind this, the fact that Russia is massively overstretched and preoccupied in its war in Ukraine, and they were providing a lot of the air power that kept Assad in power. And also Iran, well, they were propping Assad up through their proxy Hezbollah. They've taken a huge hit through the Israeli onslaught we've seen over the past months. Then clearly the Damascus regime, brutal as it has been for 13 years, was deeply vulnerable. And it's clear that the opposition rebel forces, who are getting a lot of backing from Turkey here, decided to act, and they may have found greater success than they expected, Jake.
What comes next, do you think?
Yeah, this is the ultimate question, right? I mean, obviously, we get 72 hours here of jubilation. This was one of the most horrific regimes on the planet. Chemical weapons used against children in 2013. I saw random airstrikes that flattened a building from which they pulled the bodies of 9 children back at the beginning of the civil war. You can't get much worse than Bashar al-Assad. What comes next? Well, it's, I think, an unknown, but ultimately we do know some things about it. And we know that the leader of this movement, militarily very successful as it was, still has a $10 million bounty on his head from the United States because of his earlier Al-Qaeda affiliations. Is that something you give up? Is it something you mature from? Well, he's suggesting that's the case. But also, Jake, remember, leading a military campaign, a very, very different job to governance, particularly the governance of a country that's been so heavily damaged and torn by sectarian violence, as indeed Syria has. So a huge job, frankly, for anyone to undertake, let alone somebody who probably has minimal experience of ruling, and many immediate challenges as well, frankly. We have to see how Syria's new neighbors respond to this sudden change in the dynamic, the disappearance of Iranian power, Moscow overnight suddenly being exposed as a paper tiger in this regard. So much more to play out, but really with the ultimate question of whether the extremist parts of this rebel opposition group, which we've known have been there for some time, really have dissipated, really don't become part of the future of Syria. That's what US officials are reminding people constantly about, their fear of a resurgence of ISIS. They're already there. They're already around in the desert looking for an opportunity. But remember, too, there is certainly time here for Syrians to have hope, to have ambitions for a better society, and to try and realize that just when the rubber hits the road, Jake, we simply don't know what's going to happen in a deeply troubled region.
All right, Nick Paton Walsh, thank you so much. Joining us now, the man who presided over President Trump's withdrawal of U.S. forces from northern Syria in 2019, former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper.
And I don't have a clip of Mark Esper. I actually have Senator MarkWayne Mullin of Oklahoma answering a question about whether Trump is right in his kind of isolationist stance on what's happening in Syria. And, well, before I get to the newsmaker clips, I have one more news summary to show you. Oh, and by the way, I put a link in the live chat to the UN report that concluded that Syria, the use of chemical weapons in Syria in 2013 if I don't know what evidence. It was Zed Alpha in the comments who was questioning about the chemical weapons and citing the UN as a source. So I thought maybe you would believe the UN report there. But anyway, I want to show you the last news summary. It's very brief. NBC News Meet the Press. I think I mentioned at the beginning of the live stream, had this exclusive interview with Donald Trump, and they spent almost the whole program on that. You saw in the news summary, they didn't even mention, or you'll see in the news summary, they don't even mention what happened in Syria or any news other than the fact that they've got this exclusive interview. Then I mentioned many times that that's like a bias of all the corporate media. It's not partisan political bias, but they always have a bias for like playing up as big news, whatever their exclusive interview or their new poll or whatever. It's a, their introspect, whatever is theirs and theirs exclusively is big news, more big news than it really is. I mean, the interview was worth watching. There were some interesting parts of it, but here's the therefore lack of news summary from Kristen Welker yesterday on Meet the Press over here.
Good Sunday morning. President-elect Donald Trump is the first president to win non-consecutive terms since Grover Cleveland, and we haven't heard from him extensively since his decisive victory until now. I sat down with the president-elect at Trump Tower in New York on Friday for his first broadcast interview since winning the election. We spoke for nearly an hour and a half in a wide-ranging conversation about what these next 4 years will look like. He told me his first 100 days will focus on bringing down prices, addressing the border, and getting his cabinet picks confirmed. And I asked him what he'll do on his first day in office.
And yeah, so like I said, no news at the beginning of NBC News Meet the Press, and they finally mentioned the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad in Syria about halfway through the program. In the clip I'm about to show you, the first newsmaker clip, this is Kristen Welker almost tried to make it look like, even though this interview with Trump was recorded on Friday, that they were going to get to something about Syria, and they never really did. In fact, they report briefly on what happened in Syria, and they transition to the interview where he talks about Ukraine and then NATO. So I guess it's still in the foreign policy realm. What really I found disturbing about the way Trump talks about what's happening in Ukraine is he uses the passive voice a lot to like avoid saying like who's killing people or who's responsible, and basically he doesn't blame Russia, or you couldn't tell if he blamed Russia from anything he says in this clip. Doesn't blame Putin. He does blame someone though. It's at the very end of the clip. Who do you think he blames? I'll let you guess while we watch that clip from Meet the Press yesterday together over here.
Welcome back. The Syrian government fell overnight, a stunning end to the more than 50-year rule of the Assad family as rebels claimed Damascus. I pressed the president-elect on a range of foreign policy issues, including U.S. support for Ukraine and NATO in his second administration.
Should Ukraine prepare for less aid from the United States after you're sworn into office?
Yeah, probably. Sure.
You said you can end the war in 24 hours. You've even said you want to try to end it before you're sworn into office.
I'm trying to end it.
You're actively trying to?
I am.
Have you talked to President Putin?
No, I have not.
You haven't talked to President Putin since you've been elected?
No. Well, I don't want to say that, but I haven't spoken to him recently.
So you've spoken to President Putin since you've been elected?
I don't want to say that. I don't want to say anything about that because I don't want to do anything that could impede the negotiation.
But you
I want to stop
talked
it.
about
Let me tell you what I have talked about. Let me tell you. There are people being killed in that war at levels that nobody's ever seen before. You have to go back to the Second World War, and even that, if you take a look at, and you know what it is? It's the soldiers largely. The cities have been emptied out and demolished. The country has been demolished. If I won that election, which you know how I feel about it, I won't get into it because we don't need to start that argument. I think it's an easy argument. It was really proven even more conclusively by the win that I had on this one. But
you did get a point, sir.
Well, that's your opinion, but I disagree with it. Had I assumed kept control, number one, Israel wouldn't have happened. Number two, Ukraine would have never happened. It would have never happened, Ukraine, Russia. But the number of people that are being killed, soldiers, young, beautiful soldiers, hundreds of thousands of people are being killed. And, you know, it's very interesting. It's level, totally level, the battlefields, totally level. You know what's happening? Yeah. The only thing that stops a bullet, you know what it is a body, a human body. And the people that are being killed, hundreds of thousands on both sides. Russia's lost probably 500,000. Ukraine's lost higher than they say, probably 400,000. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of bodies laying all over fields. It's the stupidest thing I've ever seen, and it should have never been allowed to happen. Biden should have been able to stop it.
Sir.
So, yeah, the Russian invasion of Ukraine was Biden's fault. Nothing about it being Putin's fault, and a lot of passive voice, use of the passive voice as to people being killed and cities being demolished, but not a lot of blame for the person that actually started that war. And I want to move on to the next clip that's kind of related, which this is Kevin Roberts, the head of the Heritage Foundation, famous for their Project 2025. He didn't show up on Fox News a lot during the campaign. They were trying to pretend that that didn't really exist. And now he's back. And Project 25 is kind of back too. But this is the clip I promised earlier where on Fox News, this guy from the Heritage Foundation is going to try to give Trump credit, of all people, for the fall of Bashar al-Assad. And then Juan Williams, the voice from the left, such as he is, and he's apparently good friends with Kevin Roberts, at least as they're arguing with each other here. He tries to mention, oh, well, Biden did it or get some credit, and especially, you know, because the reason this happened, you've seen it in the news summaries already, is because of the weakness of Russia and Iran, and part of that has to do with the Israeli attack on Hezbollah, and but also it has to do with Biden's policy on Iran, and the Republicans attacked Biden for being weak on Iran so much, and Iran is actually what has been weakened. And as Juan Williams points out here, Biden gave a lot of support to Israel to his political detriment. So if he's going to get the blame from the left for being Genocide Joe, then he's got to get some credit for the weakening of Iran and the fall of Bashar al-Assad. If that, I mean, it's a good thing he's gone. Whether he'll be replaced by something better, you also saw from the news summaries, is an open question. But I found this is typical Fox News, where you have Juan Williams is totally shut down here. He doesn't get the first word on the issue. He doesn't get the last word on the issue. He gets to like talk a little in the middle, while the majority of everyone else on the panel is apparently in agreement that Trump gets the credit for the fall of Bashar al-Assad. And why? Oh, the reason why? Moral clarity, of course. Moral clarity.
This is the point. One of the reasons that Syria has fallen is because of the moral clarity that Donald Trump brings to this picture. And I think that you're going to see all of the confusion, all of the hot spots that Susan rightly touches on actually come into focus. We're going to have peace through strength, because we're going to have a lot better priorities. We're going to have a lot better leaders in all of these key positions. God bless Donald Trump for having the willingness to break the backs, not just of these evil people abroad, but also break the backs of the Washington establishment.
Don't you think that Joe Biden deserves a little credit for taking on Russia, for taking on Iran, and in fact, strongly backing Israel to the point that Iran is now in decline, unable to support Assad, Russia's in decline, its troops suffering tremendous losses,
I love you, Juan, but that is fantasy land.
Okay, I just think he's been the president for the last 4 years, and we've seen our enemies decline, and And, you know, a lot of this is now going to, by the way, go
I travel
to
the
Trump.
world for my job, and what I hear constantly from heads of state, from ambassadors, is that we want moral clarity from the President of the United States.
Right.
There is no way in the world, with all due respect, my friend,
No, I
that
appreciate
he
that.
offers, Joe Biden offers moral clarity. Donald Trump's done more to bring peace to this world. He's not even been inaugurated.
Well, he's not in office, and I think, you know, politically, having gone through the election with you, you know that, in fact, President Biden has paid a huge price for his unalloyed support of Israel and willingness to go after Iran and go after
denuded
Russia.
Hezbollah over the objections of Biden and Jake Sullivan.
Well, that's just one of the many places that it's not settled yet. And
Yeah, I guess it's not settled yet whether Trump should get credit for the fall of Bashar al-Assad, but his, when I think Trump, the words moral clarity aren't the, I mean, when I think Trump, the word moral itself is not the first word that springs to mind. Trump is not known for his moral clarity on many things, but I almost could have used that as the political comedy clip. This next clip is also a Republican trying to blame Biden for what's happening, or in this case, it's not giving Trump credit, but blaming Biden for the Turkish-backed HTS group being the dominant group to overthrow Bashar al-Assad. And talk about fantasy land, I think that was a word in the last clip there. The reason that the Republican here, Representative Mike Turner, says that Biden is blameworthy because he couldn't get he couldn't get Turkey and the Kurds to get along. You know, the Kurds are the U.S. more and the rest of NATO back the Kurds. They generally have less terrorism ties, although Turkey has this Kurdish liberation group as designated as a terrorist organization. And maybe some people remember the Kurds from the whole U.S. invasion of Iraq. And I even talked about the Kurds long ago, and in terms of their right to self-determination. That's something I often think about when people say the state of Israel has a right to exist, you know, as a nation. And I wonder, I mean, being a, you know, national or ethnic group doesn't necessarily give you a right to have a nation state, I don't think. I'm not saying Israel does or doesn't have a right to exist, but it's kind of like the wrong question, because if that's true, then why doesn't the Kurdish, you know, why doesn't Kurdistan or the whatever you would call the Kurdish nation have a right to exist? I mean, if you go back to Woodrow Wilson's 14 points after World War I that talked about national self-determination, he actually specifically mentioned the Kurds, that they were supposed to have a right to a state. And that I made a video about that a long time ago, I remember, and talked about Wilson's 14 points. I didn't think of that till just now when I was thinking about how, anyway, so Turkey and the Kurds don't get along because one of the places where the Kurds would want to have their state is in Turkey. Some of it's in Iraq. Some of it's in Syria. And anyway, I think I've spent enough time pre-criticizing this clip. You don't really get any follow-up from Margaret Brennan on that issue. You know, when Mike Turner makes the claim that Biden is responsible for Turkey and the Kurds not getting along, no follow-up question, but I'll talk about that a little more after we watch the clip together over here.
Just a stunning turn of events within such a short period of time. The U.S. doesn't have a diplomatic presence inside of Syria. Our visibility is a little limited here. What is it that you think Americans need to know about this turn of events?
Well, Margaret, that was an excellent report, because you certainly laid the groundwork of this. Has been an incredibly brutal civil war with hundreds of thousands of people dying, including the use of chemical weapons, and of course reminding people that the Obama administration had said this would be a red line, that we would use military force to stop the use of chemical weapons, then failing to do so. This is a Islamic militia that has risen up and has continued and now is successfully toppling the Assad regime. As your report indicated, it's Al-Qaeda in its origins, but it opposes ISIS. It is Turkish-backed. This is a blow to Iran, a blow to Russia. We're seeing what is likely a disintegration in Syria. The big questions will be, what does this mean for the U.S.? What does it mean for Iran, Russia, the neighbors of Israel and Jordan, which are strong allies of the United States?
So you mentioned there, and we showed the picture of Abu Muhammad al-Jilani. He is the leader of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. People call it HTS. You're going to hear a lot about that in the coming days and weeks. The rebel group that appears to be taking control, but they are working also with the prime minister. The United States government has a $10 million bounty on the head of Jilani. Do you think the United States still should keep that? Should Americans be concerned that this will mean something in terms of impact for terror threats to the United States?
Well, this is a terrorist organization and group. This is not going to be just a passing of power and authority. It could be. We'll have to obviously watch that. You know, one of the things that we do see here, though, is this is a diplomatic failure with respect to the United States and Turkey. You know, the U.S. has troops in Syria. This is on the border of Turkey. Turkey is a NATO ally. The United States is working with the Kurds. This really could have been an opportunity for the United States to work to try to resolve the issue between the Kurds, Turkey, and the United States in working with Turkish interests in Syria. Hopefully this could be an opportunity where there could be a diplomatic support there that hopefully could have, help in this transition in Syria.
There are 900 U.S. troops in Syria in the south. Donald Trump in 2019 pulled U.S. troops out of northern Syria, abandoning our allies there. Do you believe he will stand by the 900 U.S. troops that remain there, or should he consider pulling them out when he takes office?
Well, I think one of the things that Donald Trump will make clear is that any threat to U.S. troops will be unbelievably responded to. So everyone should understand absolutely that the United States troops are to be secure. The second thing is he does absolutely support the Kurds, and that he's going to look for a diplomatic solution. I think there'll be an assessment as to whether or not the troops should remain, but it's. I think here there is an opportunity for the parties, especially now that Iran and Russia's roles are going to be diminished. They have been brutal in their support with Assad. The hundreds of thousands of people, including the use of chemical weapons that have been killed, have been under the Russian influence there. Russia still has 2 bases, a naval and air force base there, that are going to be, both at risk for Russia, but also a risk to the population of Syria, because they have been used before to attack the Syrian population. We'll have to see what Russia does there. But this is going to be an area that's going to be highly volatile and in transition.
And no idea where Bashar al-Assad might have fled.
So, yeah, that was the follow-up question. I showed you what Mike Turner said there. He also mentioned the chemical weapons from his post as the chair of the House Intelligence Committee. If you believe, I guess that depends on if you believe the U.S. government and the CIA and or our 18 different intelligence agencies that possibly will be headed up by the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, in the Trump administration. I guess we'll see about that. And the next 2 clips are on a slightly different topic, or they're talking about Trump giving his isolationist views about Syria, and the 2 arguments against it that you're going to hear are that there are terrorist groups there that could be a threat to the United States, and also the chemical weapons in the second clip with Jake Tapper and Senator MarkWayne Mullin. But first, just in terms of and this is kind of what I mentioned I would show as a possible split in the Republican Party. This is like the hawkish Republican view. This is how we got involved in Iraq in the first place, is that we have to project our force to stop threats from, and then we spent almost 20 years in Afghanistan for basically nothing, because we didn't want to have the possible threat of what happens when there are ungoverned spaces. That's the argument you're about to hear from retired General Frank McKenzie. We can't have ungoverned spaces, and I don't know. I'm starting to feel like maybe during the Trump years we might end up living in an ungoverned space, or I don't know. That's not really it, but I don't really buy this argument, but here it is from ABC and Martha Raddatz with her ties to the military-industrial complex, like retired General Frank McKenzie.
And President-elect Trump has weighed in on his social media platform saying Syria is a mess but is not our friend, and the United States should have nothing to do with it. This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved. So what do you think will happen when President Trump takes office?
I think President Trump will look at the merits of the case. Our interest in Syria is probably preventing violent extremist groups from being able to plan and execute attacks against our homeland and the homeland of our friends and partners abroad. I agree with him. It's a mess. They're no friend of ours. They've never been a friend of ours. But we have interests, and those interests are preventing attacks on the U.S. homeland from ungoverned spaces. If Syria could very well become an ungoverned space, so we'll have to approach that and look at it as he comes into office, and I'm sure he'll take a good hard look at it.
Okay, thanks very much for joining us.
Okay, yeah, I really trustworthy of the judgment of Donald Trump and his Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and his Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard, who, as I mentioned earlier, and I saw someone also mentioning in the live comments, Tulsi Gabbard was one of the people who questioned whether Syria actually used chemical weapons on their own people. And I, over the course of this live stream, put multiple sources in the live comments there that you can look at from the UN and from Human Rights Watch, but there are a lot of other people who have reported that. I still said in my 2013 video I showed at the beginning of the live stream that it's likely he used chemical weapons. Even that UN report, I think they concluded it, but they concluded the chemical weapons were used. And I think there was some reporting on it being dropped from a Syrian Air Force plane, at least in one instance, and whatever. So that also comes up in this next clip where Jake Tapper talks about this threat of terrorist groups and then also the threat of chemical weapons with Senator MarkWayne Mullin of Oklahoma, who may be one of those more hawkish Republicans that may cause this split in the Republican Party, maybe push Trump to not be isolationist. I mean, and Pete Hegseth isn't really known for his isolationism based on his commentary on Fox and Friends Weekend. But anyway, this is the final Newsmaker clip before I show you the bonus Cheech and Chong the Kittens clip. I mentioned today, December 9th, is the 1-year anniversary of us adopting Cheech and Chong the Kittens, and so we got them a little gift. I'll show sort of a semi-unboxing of the gift as the final Cheech and Chong the Kittens clip after we watch Jake Tapper and Senator MarkWayne Mullin talk about Trump's isolationist views and if that's going to be what actually happens in the next 4 years over here.
The Assad regime collapsed. President-elect Trump posted on Truth Social, quote, "This is not our fight," and arguing the U.S. should not get involved. I certainly understand the sentiment and the desire to not have U.S. troops involved, but what happens if extremists who are part of the rebel groups get their hands on Assad's chemical weapons and plan to use them against the 900 American troops in southern Syria or against Israel? What happens if we see a resurgence of ISIS or Al-Qaeda in the region because of this? Is there no role at all ever for the U.S. here?
Well, when it becomes a national security interest and a threat to the United States, then we would get involved. But I agree with the president that we shouldn't be involved in this. This isn't our fight. But make no mistake about this. This wasn't an accident. The rebels didn't just suddenly find an opportunity to move forward. What had happened here is Israel had completely taken out the ability for Hezbollah, which is a direct arm of Iran, that was controlling a lot of Syria, that a lot of people didn't understand. When Israel completely decimated Hezbollah, this left the door wide open. And I don't think it was a mistake that the rebels moved. I believe there was probably some coordination that took place. I would be real surprised if there isn't some interaction that the rebel forces had with the IDF on the timing of this. The timing is always important, and it wasn't an accident. The timing took place the way that it did in this point too. So the person who's wounded the most here is Iran. Some stability will take place, I believe, in Syria now that Assad is gone. When you had Iran, which is an extreme terrorist, terrorist government, and you have Russia who's controlling the airspace, and you've had Assad who's been willing to use chemical weapons on their on his own citizens, then that is destabilization. I don't know what the rebels are going to bring in, but I don't know how you get much worse than what you already had underneath the current regime.
So that's the final Newsmaker clip. I hope you appreciate the time and effort I put into picking out the clips and adding my commentary and criticism. My jaw is getting a little sore here at the end, but I did promise the bonus Cheech and Chong, the kittens unboxing before I finish the show. Semi-unboxing, we still have to put the thing together, but here starts with Chong and ends with Cheech over here.
LiberalViewer presents.
Oh, sorry, hit that clip by mistake. Hit the wrong button. I am getting a little tired here, so thanks for joining me. I have 6 more episodes till my final Monday Media Mix-Up on Monday, January 20th, 2025, the Trump inauguration, Martin Luther King Day. Should be a big news day, and I'll cover it for the final live stream. I may have some other videos to upload during the week. I'll see how things go, but until then, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.